Picture this. It's the early 2000s. You're walking through a crowded street and almost every hand is holding the same device. Not an iPhone, not a Samsung, but a small, durable, brick-like phone with a tiny screen, buttons you could type on without looking. And of course, the iconic game Snake. That device, a Nokia phone. For a while, Nokia was the king of mobile phones, commanding over 40% of the global market share. Their name was synonymous with reliability, durability, and trust. If you owned a Nokia, you didn't just own a phone, you owned a piece of the future. But today, Nokia is a shadow of its former self. Once the titan of mobile technology, now it barely exists in the smartphone conversation. So what happened? This is the story of how Nokia went from world dominance to losing its edge. Believe it or not, Nokia didn't start as a phone company. The story begins in 1865, yes, 19th century, when a Finnish engineer named Fredrik Idestam founded a paper mill in southern Finland. That's right, paper. Over the decades, Nokia diversified. Rubber, cables, electronics, you name it, they dabbled in it. But it wasn't until the 1970s and 80s that Nokia entered the telecommunications industry. By the 1990s, Nokia had transformed itself into a global telecommunications leader. Their phones were sleek for their time, incredibly durable and easy to use. They became status symbols, not just in Finland, but across the entire world. Models like the Nokia 3310 and Nokia 1100 were practically indestructible. Drop them, throw them, run them over with a car. These phones just didn't die. By the early 2000s, Nokia was on top of the world. They had become the largest phone manufacturer globally, holding almost half the market share. To put that into perspective, imagine a single company today outselling Apple, Samsung, and every Chinese brand combined. That was Nokia. Their phones weren't just popular, they were cultural icons. But here's the thing about success. Sometimes it blinds you. While Nokia was busy selling millions of devices, the mobile world was changing. Fast. In 2007, Steve Jobs stood on a stage and introduced the iPhone. A device with no physical buttons, a large touchscreen, and internet browsing like a computer in your pocket. For many, it seemed radical, risky even. But Apple wasn't just launching a new phone. They were redefining what a phone could be. And how did Nokia react? With skepticism. They believed that physical buttons mattered, that consumers wouldn't adapt to touchscreens, that their dominance was unshakable. And this was their first mistake, underestimating change. At the time, Nokia's phones ran on Symbian OS. Now, Symbian was fine for simple tasks, calls, texts, Snake, but it was never built to handle the modern smartphone experience, touchscreens, apps, and internet-heavy use. Meanwhile, Apple had iOS, Google had Android. Both were modern, fast, and designed with apps in mind. Nokia, instead of fully committing to change, tried to patch Symbian to keep up. But it was like putting a turbo engine in a horse carriage. It just wasn't built for it. Developers hated it. Consumers grew frustrated. The once trusted brand was starting to look old. Behind the scenes, Nokia's leadership was struggling. They were divided on strategy. Should they embrace touchscreens fully or stick with their reliable button-based models? Should they focus on hardware innovation or invest in software ecosystems? This internal conflict slowed Nokia down. While Apple and Google were sprinting ahead, Nokia was stuck debating its identity. And worse, Nokia had a culture of fear. Employees were scared to speak up about problems, worried it would damage their careers. Issues were hidden, progress delayed. This toxic environment made innovation nearly impossible. By 2011, Nokia was desperate. Their sales were plummeting, their brand image fading, so they made a bold move. Nokia partnered with Microsoft, adopting Windows Phone as their primary operating system. On paper, this looked like a lifeline. Microsoft was huge, Windows was familiar, and maybe together they could compete against Apple and Android. But in reality, it was too little, too late. Windows Phone lacked apps, developers weren't interested, and consumers? They had already fallen in love with the ecosystems of iOS and Android. Nokia's once loyal users jumped ship. The company that had once defined mobile phones was now seen as outdated, irrelevant. By 2013, Nokia's mobile division was in freefall. Market share had collapsed from 40% to single digits. In a desperate move, Nokia sold its phone business to Microsoft for $7.2 billion. The company that once ruled the world had exited the very industry it created. And the cruel irony? Just a few years later, Microsoft itself abandoned Windows Phone. Nokia's grand partnership ended in failure. So what happened next? Well, Nokia didn't disappear entirely. They shifted focus back to telecommunications infrastructure, building the networks that power our internet and mobile connections today. They even attempted a small comeback in smartphones through licensing deals with HMD Global, launching Android-powered Nokia phones. But let's be real, Nokia never regained its crown. The world had moved on. So what can we learn from Nokia's story? Never underestimate change. Nokia dismissed the touchscreen revolution as a fad. By the time they realized it wasn't, Apple and Android had already locked in their dominance. Software matters as much as hardware. Nokia made some of the best hardware in the world, but without a competitive operating system and app ecosystem, they were left behind. Leadership and culture shaped destiny. A divided leadership team, a culture of fear and slow decision-making turned challenges into disasters. Adapt or die. Technology moves fast. Companies that don't adapt, no matter how big they are, risk becoming obsolete. The story of Nokia is both inspiring and tragic. Inspiring because it shows how a small company from Finland could rise to dominate the entire world. Tragic because it shows how quickly that dominance can disappear. At its peak, Nokia's slogan was "connecting people." And indeed, they connected millions, if not billions, across the globe. But in the end, Nokia couldn't connect with the future. And that is how the giant lost its edge. So, what do you think? Could Nokia have survived if they had adopted Android earlier? Or was their fall inevitable once Apple changed the game? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into tech history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of rise and fall. Because every empire, no matter how mighty, has its breaking point.